Hello, Peter.
Hello, Ruth.
Thanks for participating in my little interview project. And maybe we can start where it all started for you. How did you first encounter the Alexander technique? What were the circumstances? What did you do at the time?
I was 18, 19, and I walked off the squash court one day as a university student, and within a week, progressively, I bent over like that, and I carried on hurting, and nobody could do anything for it. And so I went hunting around, and in the end, a friend of my mother's said, "Why don't you try the Alexander technique?" And I don't know why I carried on with the Alexander technique, except that the guy whom I went to, who was Patrick Macdonald, moved a bit like an athlete. And I thought, yeah, well, if I do that when I'm 50, I'll buy that. Maybe he knows something, maybe he doesn't. And it was a long time before the pain actually fully went away. I mean, years rather than weeks or months. Yeah, I spent my time at university pretty well in pain and doing the worst thing possible, sitting at a desk studying. But in my final year, I thought, right, it's my finals. I'm going to dedicate myself to playing cricket instead of the exams because I discovered that I could play cricket again. And yeah, I got away with that. I could have probably got a better degree, but it was the choice of a young man, I think.
So what did you study?
I studied psychology and philosophy. And
in London?
No, at Oxford.
In Oxford. And so you met Alexander actually before you went to university? Not Alexander, Macdonald.
Well, it was literally my first term at university that I had this squash court episode, and then literally I met Macdonald in the April, I think, of that year, of the next year. So it would be November or December that the pain started. And I came across Macdonald, I think, probably in the April of, in the April vacation.
And it was never properly diagnosed what you had?
I went to everybody. And I was promised all sorts of things.
Yeah.
My favorite quote was from this rather smart orthopedic surgeon who said, yes, well, that'll be all right. Yes, we can sort that out for you. Yes, I'll send you to a physiotherapist and they'll give you some exercises. They may make it better. They may make it worse. But don't worry about that. In that case, I can always operate. And I thought, do you have a way of deleting expletives from this tape? But,
I have.
What I thought I didn't say, and I thought, right.
Yeah. That's not
And
very...
I went away really sort of exploding because I had by the time I met this guy, I had been to Macdonald a bit, and I had a bit of sort of hope, and I think, I think it was that he had something in the way he moved that I thought, right, I might as well learn that. And
so you had lessons with him first, or
I had lessons with him, and then I finished off my university course. So that would be probably 2 years, 3 years later. So I had lessons. I had lessons with his wife. I had lessons with Peter Scott. And then I was doing a master's degree after graduating, and I suddenly realized, I can dovetail the two, and I can do my Alexander training at the same time I'm doing my master's degree, and that was the beginning of a whole story, which I think really changed my life, because I think it basically gave me some hope, and I could progressively start doing all the things that I had done before.
So you came across the Alexander technique very early in life, and started training right away.
Well, I started training when I was, I think, 23, and I graduated when I was 26.
And how did you experience the training with Macdonald?
I found it just exclusively extremely interesting. I was just fascinated by it. Because the thing about him was that really he only taught one thing. And in terms of looking after yourself, well, take yourself up. And in terms of what you do with the other person is that you put your hands on them and arrange for their head to go forward and up, etc., etc., etc. And that was it. And there was that one consistent thing which he was able to point to consistently. And so I don't know whether he trained my eye or whether I decided that that was what I had to learn. And so I could look at somebody working and would say, as he did, no, that's not it. Take them up. And he would, and it was either up or it was down for him. And it was absolutely crystal clear. And in my opinion, very few people since then have actually managed to clearly make that distinction in their work.
And how did he help you learn that? So putting hands on.
Well, it's traditional to say that the person who trained you really couldn't explain things very well, as all the old teachers said that Alexander couldn't. But he took your hands and he demonstrated with your hands on a body, and again and again and again and again and again. So you were just exposed to a very simple, but in the event not so easy thing that you were required to do with your hands.
Yeah.
and it's just sheer repetition. And you know, we used to say of our fellow students, also, don't like working with them because they absolutely haven't got it. So there was little cliques saying, yeah, well, we rather like there was a clique in Alexander's class. There were cliques of people who were on the trail and others who hadn't got it. And that was very much the atmosphere in those days, and I suspect was to some extent, it was the atmosphere in the Alexander world at that time, that there were 3 different schools in London, and something going on in the States which was unspeakable. No, but I have to say that Macdonald always rated Marjory Barlow, and he said she was as good as any of us. So it was quite interesting that navigating that territory and also figuring out who had been, figuring out, because we used to exchange work, students sometimes, and figuring out who had been trained by who, and so on, and what you liked and what you didn't like. And I was particularly allergic to anybody who pulled me down, because I was really vulnerable. I didn't want to be in constant pain again. And I'd figured out that there was one thing which took me out of the pain, not terribly consistently, but it's still a chance. Whereas there was another thing which was shoving me back into my old habits, and I just didn't want that.
So your condition, whatever it was, got better over time, consistently.
And I changed shape to a degree. Literally, my body changed shape. It never completely reversed all the stuff that was obviously going on, because it dated from very young, and therefore stuff had got sort of cemented in. But like a crazy old man, I'm still trying to dig into that stuff, and it's quite interesting.
Do you sometimes work on each other?
Occasionally, yeah. I won't say once a week. It depends. It depends if we're stuck around doing nothing, then maybe as much as once a week. Otherwise, once every 3 months.
But you do it on a relatively regular basis.
Yeah. And the easy option is quick table turn, just to get rid of the damage one's done to oneself in the last little while, and but also more recently, actually, serious chair work.
Great. Well, it's very handy to have a good Alexander teacher in the house.
But they're not all, they don't always want to work. I mean, I don't always want to work.
Yeah. Okay, but back to the training. So in the training, you met Ellie.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Our eyes met across a crowded room. Not exactly. I was in my last term, and there'd been 1 or 2 Israeli girls appear, but this new Israeli girl appeared, and Well, nothing very much happened initially, and it was a while before we got together.
Mm. But you graduated before quite a while
exactly
before.
3 years before, in fact, because my last term was her first term.
Yeah, okay.
Mm.
And after graduation, you started teaching?
Yeah.
Mm. Because you had also done your master's by that time?
Yeah.
And how did that influence each other?
Well, there's kind of two answers to that. One of them is that I worked. I had various part-time jobs teaching psychology.
Mm-hmm.
I also did a little bit of paid sort of hack psychological testing. So we went and tested samples of bricklayers and what have you, which was, bricklayers, gas fitters, on particular applied ability tests, for example, because I was an occupational psychologist, a work psychologist. So that was going on at the same time as I was attempting to build up an Alexander practice. And actually, it was much easier to build up an Alexander practice in those days because the Alexander technique was popular and newer than nowadays. And so therefore it was relatively easy to give sort of 15 lessons a week, no trouble, 3 lessons a day, not difficult.
Wow.
And some people gave 30 lessons a week, which is 6 lessons a day. But and then then I was thinking, I can't carry on like this. Family, got to support a family, and I walked into the public library. I'd actually been to the class because I continued to go to Macdonald's class after graduating, and I was sheltering from the rain in Buckingham Palace Road public library, and I was looking at the Times Higher Education supplement, and I saw a job advertisement for a temporary lecture in psychology at what was then Enfield College of Technology, and that was so I went there, got the job. The person I was replacing had her baby, came back, but somebody else left. So there was a permanent job available, and I applied for that. And I guess because they knew me and decided that I was reasonably okay to work with, not a complete disaster, they decided to take me on. And I stayed there through the evolution from Enfield College of Technology, which became Middlesex Polytechnic, and which eventually became Middlesex University. So without any effort at all, I became a university lecturer, and I taught. I found a nice niche for myself where I could, in those days, work in the university 3 or 2.5 days a week, and be back at home and teach Alexander the rest of the time. Then sort of life kind of moved on to where I had to do more work in the university. And by that time, we'd started the training course. And so we employed somebody to work on the training course at the same, at the time when I was having to be in the university.
Yeah.
And more or less that was how that all fitted together. But there's another answer to the fitting together bit, which is that, there's all sorts of bits and pieces in the, in work psychology. The Alexander technique relates to stress management and that kind of stuff. But also the Alexander technique, and it's only now being emphasized. The Alexander technique is, quote, psychophysical technique. And so it's actually being related to and used alongside, and are they the same thing or aren't they? All sorts of questions arise. Everything from conventional psychotherapy to mindfulness, cognitive behavior therapy, and a whole series of more modern versions of psychotherapeutic work. And that, if I look at myself, I can see how my misuse of myself relates back and looking at photographs of myself at ages, 5, 10, 15, 20, and I could see that what I was doing to myself progressively, and eventually bringing about my backache. But there was plenty of other stuff as well. I preferred, I think, to have physical symptoms than psychological symptoms, because I was brought up to be a good little English boy who behaved himself and didn't express very much and didn't, and so it's acceptable to have backache, but not to have tantrums, effectively.
Happens to a lot of people. Yeah. So the injury on the squash ground was actually only the moment when it really manifested.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you've screwed up your body and you got it into a condition of stress, for want of a better word. Then all you need is a couple of movements to a stressed up body and something will go.
Yeah.
And but actually, I think what happened with me was that nothing actually clicked out of place, was damaged, except in as much as I had a couple of discs that normally should be like that, but the X-rays at the age of 20 showed that there were discs which were that shape, worn away. And I haven't had an X-ray or anything taken of it since, but touch wood, it's not hurting. And I don't know what those discs look like.
It's better not to know sometimes.
Yes, there's a bit of me that's quite fascinated. Did they sort of grow back, or did they, is pain not caused by discs that are that shape?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in that sort of question.
Yeah. But I think the science is backing that up, that it's what you see in the picture is not necessarily an indicator for what happens.
I have seen some horrendous X-rays of people's necks.
Yeah.
And you give them 3 or 4 Alexander lessons, and they're not hurting anymore.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah, exactly.
But as Dr. Barlow said, nothing motivates like pain.
That's true.
Mm.
Mm. You opened up the school in, what was it, 86?
84.
84. And that was, I guess, quite a big step.
It didn't feel like a terribly big step. It felt like perfectly ordinary evolution.
Yeah, but as Ellie told me, the regulations weren't as strict as they are nowadays, or because she hadn't taught at other schools yet, and before, and there was this committee, and they actually allowed her to.
Yeah, it took a couple of council meetings. I think I was actually on the council at the time, and I had to leave the room. Yeah. And there was a case recently where somebody hadn't been a member of STAT, and they had, there was a very similar case.
Interesting.
Recently. And that's another matter. And so my mind's flying to various ironies about the people on the council who later had training courses which they kind of left abruptly. Ours lasted 33 years, and there wasn't really very much of a problem. But there were people on the council at that stage who, shall we say, spoke against Ellie having a training course, because I couldn't have a training course because I couldn't be there 3/4 of the time. Anyway, there was a little bit of sort of political toing and froing, but
it worked out.
but it worked out.
Yeah.
Which means, it does mean that you don't have to take the rule book as being written by God.
Yeah. And then you ran the school together for 34 years?
Something like it. 33, 34, thereabouts.
Yeah. And I guess in the beginning also the student numbers were different than they are nowadays.
Well, at one stage we had a waiting list.
But Ellie said you wanted to keep it relatively small also.
Well, yes.
To the space and being able to work with everyone properly.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, we didn't want a course with 30 people, and what was the ratio? The ratio had to be 5-to-1, and therefore 6 teachers. I mean, I personally think that is, in the final resort, confusing to students. They pick the teachers that they want to follow, but I'm still quite wedded to the model that at the core of the Alexander technique there is one with variations, but basically one core let the neck be free, let the head go forward and up to lengthen and widen the back, which is the right one. There's a hell of a lot of versions which are flying around. And if you go to Dublin next August, you will have an opportunity to witness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep my mouth shut about that. And that produces a conflict for me, which is, I like to get on with people. So how do you say, I don't enjoy your work? And there are still people around whose work I really flinched from in my early days, and we've never worked since.
Well, actually, that is my start for this interview series, that I think that Alexander teachers are, in a way, like artists, that their work is very much informed by their life and the experience of their life, and that therefore their work must be different from each other. And that is a good thing in my view. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yes, within range.
Yeah.
Don't ask me what the Alexander technique is, but somehow or other for me, the core of the Alexander technique is to be able to access the feet via the back from the head and neck. And likewise, if I take somebody's hand, I should be able to find my way through the body or through the shoulder girdle, probably down into the sternum, through the bony structure, to find the feet, so that everything is coordinated and supported, so that I can do that with an arm, and I get a bounce back from the feet up through the whole system. And something like that physically, and likewise head to feet, which has the effect of sorting out the shoulder girdle or whatever, that being able to, that one's dealing with the infrastructure of the body. And so basically I'm a car mechanic at hand, and I just want to get that thing, that thing working properly and smoothly. And sometimes you can get that happening with with words, with a psychological thought, with a, oh, I don't need to pull myself down, take myself up. Oh, maybe the things in the room are a little bit lower than I thought they were. That sort of stuff. But there's also, I'm a little bit scared of what's going on here. That sort of stuff. So, face the fear, face the anxiety. And there are sort of liberating ideas, like a quote from somebody, I can't remember who it was, which is that anxiety is excitement without the oxygen, which is a nice quote. It's like, I'm afraid of thumping him, therefore I'm a bit scared of what I might do next. But on the other hand, if I thump him, I can have a whale of a time. This is I'm in danger of getting into Andrew Tate land now, but
Please don't.
But I mean, it is. I don't know if you saw the mini-series on adolescence. I mean,
I did.
It's like these are problems that I guess quite possibly I solved by becoming a good English boy rather than a macho, whatever else I might have been, and it was being able to engage in sporting activities that enabled me to use my body in a way that got rid of some of its energy that I think got squashed very, very young.
Yeah, you were saying that it's a little bit like a car mechanic. That is, of course, a very mechanistic view of the technique.
Yep.
But how does that combine with your psychological knowledge?
Both and.
Yes.
I'll say you can cut it out, but I had a car mechanic who was a very good car mechanic, an old-fashioned one, and Ellie had an old car which kept on just cutting out on stopping, and it was put on test on all sorts of electronic equipment and so on, and eventually she. I said, "Oh, go on, let's take it down to Paul." And Paul said, yes. And so he went round it with his screwdriver. That should have given it, that should have been enough to give it severe arseache. And, but literally, there was... it's as though, I think you can be psychological about mechanical things, particularly if they're human beings. I mean, we have sports psychology, which is about getting the maximum physical effectiveness out of a machine. If you care to define a machine quite broadly.
Yeah. But as we are psychophysical beings, so you can't separate it out anyway, can you? Yeah,
but you can work down one dimension. You can work down a physical dimension. And so somebody who all of a sudden feels a release from attention, which has been released by a car mechanic, is going to remain a psychological being. I use the expression a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because I'm supposed to be a psychologist, but I like purely physical things. This morning I was repairing cracks which had appeared in the wall and ceiling of a room 2 floors up from here. I like fixing things. End gaining.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. How did your teaching evolve over all those decades?
Very much by the rules at the beginning, and now anything goes. That's never fine. Literally. So I can hang around and just listen to somebody, or So if somebody's on the table and you literally squash their back down, you can sometimes undo the shoulders in a way that just thinking about them doesn't work. And if it does work, you can make the arms go light. There's a few cheap tricks, like if you push the area just below where the collarbone goes into the sternum, just there, and you squash that down, what will happen is that you won't be having this happening. You'll actually be stopping this from happening, if you're lucky. I mean, there's an awful lot of feel to this.
Yeah, that comes with experience.
Which comes exactly. But if you ask the person lying on the table and you're pressing down here, picking the elbows up from the table goes light if what you've succeeded in doing is stopping this from happening, so they're not fighting against that. So basically, I play around with all sorts of things.
Yeah,
and that's
so more free in
I experiment. That is more of the car mechanic. And there are those who say that that's not the Alexander technique, and let them say it. But it's really the Alexander technique is one of my personal explorations, and I explore.
Yeah.
But I used to play it very much by the rule book. Back to your original question.
Yeah. And can you describe your approach to training students?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I know it's a difficult question.
No, I get it. No, it's basically that I still think that what I have to teach them is to find that core, so that when they put their hands on, and it's going to be easier perhaps putting it on the body rather than on the head and neck, which is a bit more advanced, to get them coming up out of themselves and to get them thinking up out of themselves rather than down into themselves, so that it re-coordinates everything else that's going on through the body, down into the sitting bones, knees forward, and eventually finding the feet. So I'm sitting here as best I can, and it's not perfect by any means, feet into the ground and going up there. And I'm joining all the bits up. And what one's enabling to happen with the hands is to get that sense. And I think if one can communicate a picture of a connected body, the potential for a body to be connected through from the feet to the head, and it doesn't matter whether it's top down, head forward and up, etc., or feet into the ground.
Yeah.
To have the other bit going. I think it's actually both. And so and certainly Macdonald used to when there was a difficult pupil, he used to wheel in a couple of students and get them to nail the person's feet to the ground and make the legs work, whilst he was working on the top end, possibly even with a third student. And he would literally have two students working on a difficult person under the guidance of his hands.
Mm. And over those decades, you had quite a few assistant teachers, trainers. How open were you to different approaches or slightly different approaches, or did they all come from the same background, or
more or less the same background? So there wasn't too much of a problem, and if there was a problem, I shut my eyes. Because you're not going to change the way an experienced teacher works. So we didn't have inexperienced teachers, so I'm not going to be able to retrain them in my image. But you know, I'd occasionally get asked by students, but he or she lets me get out of the chair in such and such a way. And I said, yeah.
well, in my experience in my training was that the trainers were quite different actually, and that enriched my experience very much, I have to say.
But can I ask the question then? Were you left with the task of finding a version for yourself, or did you have any particular model that you cared to follow? You see the two models of training, that one is find out for yourself, and you're shown all these, you're shown the a la carte menu, and the other version is that you've got a set meal, and this is what you follow.
Well, I'm probably more for the first version, that it has to grow inside myself.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, with guidance, but maybe with different influences in different stages of the training. Of course, there's the head of training, but I think it is, for me, it was and still is important to develop my own thing in the end.
Oh, sure. But it was in a way a rhetorical question, because it is a kind of open question as to what's the best way to train people, which is, I think, where this thread started. And I don't know what's the best way to train people, except people whose work I have enjoyed most, not necessarily respected, because there can be quality and it's wildly different. But the ones that I enjoyed working with most were the ones who were closest to how I can see the Alexander technique. If you're talking about training, the multiple teachers model runs the risk of, shall we say, getting lost in amongst the multiple teachers, and the one teacher model runs the risk of blinkers, and it's an open question. It's a problem for the Alexander technique, because the further away it gets from Alexander, it becomes something different.
Good question, because of course Alexander himself had a quite long and development, so what he did in the beginning was very different from what he was doing in the end.
But we don't really know visually what he was doing at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, there are some teachers who subscribe to exactly that. Alexander before 1907
Yeah.
And there's ones who subscribe to things he said then and then and then and then.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
even if you refer to Alexander, to which Alexander do you refer?
Yeah. Yep. It's unfortunate. No, it is a question. I kept on, in that book over there, I kept on rewriting that last chapter, thinking maybe I could find out the answer to what the Alexander technique was. And I never did.
But that would be one of my questions about your book. Tell me a little bit about it.
Oh, it was just put together in various, over about 20 years. And then COVID came and I decided just to sew it all together.
Mm-hmm. So notes from
your
time.
Yeah, and stuff that had been previously published, which I sort of changed a little bit. But yeah.
So it's a collection of writings, or is it?
No, it has certain very definite themes. I mean, one of which is what is the Alexander technique, from the very basic, just taking the Macdonald model of the 5 things which differentiate the Alexander technique from other kinds of physical therapy or education, and so you've got
the principles.
But what are the principles? I mean, if anybody cares to read the chapter on Alexander's methodology, you'll see what a mishmash Alexander's, I don't mean methodology, I mean terminology. You'll see that Alexander's terminology is a real mishmash of ill-defined stuff, and defined in different ways in different places. But what was the original question?
About your book.
Yeah, it was. But I just wanted to write down everything I thought about it as honestly as I could, and sort of expressing things rather as I'm expressing them now. It's a me book, getting the stuff down in writing, but the other thing I tried to do, and here's the sales pitch, is that if you want to learn about the Alexander technique, you can learn absolutely everything you need to know initially by reading selectively from the book, because it is also a textbook, as well as being biographical, as well as being theoretic or critically examining the quotes theory of the Alexander technique, and so on. It does everything for everybody.
Yeah. Okay.